Voucher Office, Voucher Management and Operations Division at HUD headquarters, and I'm going to be talking to you fairly briefly this morning about the fiscal year 2012 Housing Choice Voucher NOFA. You'll see, as you may already know, since the NOFA was published and has been out there for a week or two, you'll see that it's very similar to previous years. A couple of changes that I'll bring your attention to, but primarily the slides are going to be here for to help you when you have questions and to bring up some of the larger issues that it should be a supplement to your reading the NOFA. One thing I'd like to mention quickly is that a major change this year is that if your numbers need to, if you need to submit documentation because your numbers are lower than the actual enrollment numbers, that documentation does go with your application, which is probably for 100% of you going to be an electronic application. Also, in listening to the broadcast and also in reading the NOFA, keep in mind that as for the last few years, we're focusing on really two groups of applicants primarily, those that are currently administering FSS programs, Voucher FSS, and those that are new PHAs that would just be starting programs. As I said, I'm going to go quickly through the slides. They are really meant more as a reference to you than anything. I'm not going to be answering questions on air, but you will be seeing on your screen from time to time my email address. You can email me questions, and also you can call me. And I believe that information is also in the slides, which will be posted. Starting, as I said, going briefly, eligible applicants, only PHAs may apply. Every year there is some confusion about that, but eligibility is limited to PHAs. If there's a contractor, they do have to go through the PHA as the applicant. And PHAs must either currently administer a Voucher FSS program or have HUD field office approval of the FSS action plan that authorized them to implement a Voucher FSS program. Briefly, troubled PHAs. A PHA that is CMAP troubled or has serious management review, IG, or IPA audit findings for its voucher program or mod rehab program as of the application due date must designate another organization or entity acceptable to HUD to administer the FSS program. And it's the local HUD field office that determines eligibility. If you're unsure of your status, my recommendation is that you actually check with your field office. That would be the Office of Public Housing in your local HUD field office. And if, in fact, you as an applicant are required to have an agreement and you fail to submit the agreement with your application, it would be treated as a technical deficiency and can be corrected. The problem is, of course, that must be done in a fairly short period of time, so better to make the call to the field office and confirm your status ahead of time. I'm sure that most of you are aware of this, but just as a review, the purpose of the Voucher FSS program is to promote local strategies to coordinate rental subsidy, training, and services that will enable participants to obtain employment that leads to economic independence. Also, there's a huge emphasis on eliminating the need for participants to receive cash welfare assistance, one of the cornerstones of the program, and building family assets of participants through the FSS escrow account. The role of the FSS coordinator is crucial. The coordinator ensures that the program participants are linked to training and services that they will need for the skills for their employment to achieve economic self-sufficiency. Also, to ensure that the FSS escrow accounts are established and properly maintained, to ensure that affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements for the HCVFS program are met. This was new a couple of years ago that we started emphasizing this, and it is discussed in detail in the NOFA itself. To build partnerships with employers and service providers in the community to help participants obtain jobs and services, and work with the program coordinating committee to secure commitments of public and private resources of program participants. Sometimes this is overlooked as the programs mature, but it definitely is recommended that this be an ongoing part of your program. Also, among the many roles, to monitor the progress of participants and evaluate the overall success of the program, and then coordinate with other service programs and, where appropriate, leverage shared resources. Really, from the beginning of the FSS program, there's been an emphasis on duplication of services and improved access to services. But in the last few years, we have, through the NOFA, been stressing some of the other funding that's given out by HUD. For example, in the case of the voucher program, the coordination with the Department of Veterans Affairs HUD-VASH program, if that is a program that's in your community. Not required, but just a suggestion. The purpose of the FSS program, funded under this NOFA, the coordinator positions, is to provide funding to eligible PHAs for the salary and fringe benefits of the voucher program coordinator for FSS. The funding amount in, actually that does say 2011, that is a typo. The 2012 funding, the amount available is $60 million. The maximum coordinator is $69,000. As has been true every year, salary comparability is something important. It's not something you submit with your application, but for all coordinator positions, salary comparables supporting the salary and fringe benefits requested must be on file in your PHA office. I'm not sure, that seems to be the salary freeze on positions funded last year under the fiscal year 2011 Voucher FSS NOFA. There will be no salary increase for those positions, with one exception, and that is the salary of an initial part-time position funded in 2011. May be increased to the amount of a full-time position if the applicant qualifies for a full-time position under this NOFA. The effective date of the 2012 funding awards, this is I frequently get calls on this. The ongoing funding will begin the day after your previous funding increment expires, and for new positions, the Financial Management Center will consult with the PHA about the effective date of the award. Briefly, ineligible use of funds. Funding cannot be used to pay for services and training for families, to pay the salary of a coordinator for public housing FSS, or to work on non-FSS housing choice voucher families. One thing that I would like to qualify is anything beyond incidental performance of routine voucher program functions that are reimbursed through voucher administrative fees. There is some flexibility here. The main thing to keep in mind is the effectiveness of the FSS program. A coordinator can perform some voucher program functions. We're told that some programs think they are more effective when the coordinator does the annual re-exams. That can be done. However, the thing to keep in mind and to demonstrate is that it does not detract from the effectiveness of the program. Registration and application submission. Again, it hasn't changed much. Applications must be submitted through grants.gov, or the PHA would have to obtain a waiver prior to the application due date. There is detailed information on the grants.gov registration and application process in the general section that was posted on September 19th, 2011. The slides on the fiscal year 2012 general section are available at the grants section of the HUD website at www.hud.gov. Registration with grants.gov and submission of the application, as in previous years, these are separate processes. This is sometimes quite confusing. Both initial registration and required annual updates and renewals can take several weeks. Most of you should be quite aware of this by now. It was a little painful the first couple of years. Hopefully it's become more routine now. But the message is, if you haven't already started the process, begin it immediately. It is something that has, it could keep you from submitting your application or your eligibility, so do not delay. Some brief hints as a starter. Read the general section instructions for downloading and completing your application package and follow them carefully. If more than one person is working on the application package, make sure that you are all using the same software version. When you are ready to download the application package from the grants.gov website, enter the CFDA number only, and that number for the Voucher FSS program is 14.871. That is something that's been a problem in the past. This year the instructions themselves say just to use the CFDA number, but it does offer you several other options. Also, as in previous years, use the fax transmittal form from the download of your package. If you download more than once, you need to make sure that you are working with the fax transmittal from the package that you're actually submitting. It does apparently have an embedded ID number. The application due date, it will be, as shown on the screen, it has to be received by April 24th, 2012. And electronic applications must be submitted to grants.gov prior to that deadline. And for applications submitted to grants.gov, the word received has a specific meaning, and that is that the application has been successfully uploaded to the grants.gov server, and the applicant has received confirmation of successful submission. Again, the most important message, allow enough time for the process. Don't wait until the last day or two. And the general section has a lot of warnings on this, but again, read it carefully, start soon, submit as early as you can. There is in the NOFA language about waiver of the electronic application requirement, and there are directions for requesting a waiver. I do want to stress, though, that it is highly unlikely that any waivers will be granted authorizing submission of paper applications. We have not granted any waivers in the past years, and I can really not imagine any circumstances where we would be doing that. The application deadline with the waiver, should any be granted, would actually be the deadline date, the April 24th date. There was no grace period for receipt of the mail delivery. Okay, now a quick overview of this NOFA. As I said, the submission requirements and eligibility are very similar to the fiscal year 2011 voucher NOFA. Again, this year we are using HUD policy priority status of applicants, and that is being implemented through the logic model. This NOFA gives preference to previously funded positions that meet the performance requirements for families served, and also within each category we're going to be looking at the HUD policy priority status. This year's posted numbers include not only families enrolled during the target period, but also numbers needed to calculate the percentages that we use in case we can't fund all eligible applicants in a category. The number used for eligibility determination, and which is really the number that we posted in previous years, is in the column that is titled Count Households. There has been some confusion about this. The other columns are, again, numbers that we do use in calculating percentages. Don't use them that often, but we would use them if we can't fund all applicants in a particular category. If the household count number is incorrect and would result in underfunding or ineligibility, I really don't want to don't want you to panic, and it does say on the screen, don't panic. I do mean that. I've gotten so many calls this year from people who are really quite scared that they're not going to be funded. The main thing is that you need to follow the instructions that are provided in the NOFA for documentation of the correct numbers. And this year, again, the documentation must be included with your application submission. And I think for all of you that would mean your application to grants.gov. This year, as last, there will be no affirmatively furthering fair housing certification required as a part of the application package. Instead, the NOFA does identify the actions that you'd take as the FSS coordinator. There's the citation on the screen, and the most important message is be sure to document your compliance, because someone may come at some point and ask to look at your files. Okay, very quickly, again, the fiscal year 2012 HUD policy priorities. To receive priority funding status under this NOFA, your logic model must include at least 2 of the 3 categories of policy priority activities / outputs and related required outcomes / indicators that are identified in the Voucher NOFA. There's a full discussion of HUD's policy priorities in the general section. And also in the Voucher FSS NOFA itself, it does identify the 3 policy priorities, which are policy priority number 1, job creation / employment, policy priority 4, knowledge sharing and capacity building, and policy priority 5, using housing as a platform for improving other outcomes. In order to qualify for the policy priority points, read carefully Section 5 of this year's Voucher FSS NOFA for a complete description of the activities and outputs applicable to each policy priority under this NOFA and the corresponding outcomes. And the activities and outputs and the outcomes related to policy priorities under this NOFA are actually listed in the logic model itself, the one that's posted as part of the application package this year, under the heading policy priority. So there was confusion last year with that, but the ones that we're going to be looking at to see if you qualify for those priorities will actually be labeled policy priority. And remember, 2 out of 3 you need. For example, when you go to your logic model, policy priority, job creation / employment, the activity would be partnership with the Workforce Investment Board to establish apprenticeship programs or job opportunities, and the associated output would be partnerships. The policy priority job creation, number of job placements as a result of partnership with the Workforce Investment Board, indicator full-time employment. So that would be the outcome. Previously would have been the activity that you would have chosen. Basic eligibility under the fiscal year 2012 Voucher NOFA. As I said previously, I believe we're looking at 2 categories of applicants, as we've done for the past few years, and those are PHAs currently administering Voucher FSS programs. For those, eligibility is based on the number of families under FSS contract at any time between October 1, 2010 and September 30th, 2011, including any that graduated or those that left the program without completing. So it's not a point in time, it's not those at the end. It would be any family that was under contract for any period of time between those dates. And that is based on PIC data. I wanted to remind you that also, as we've done in the last few years, there are special provisions regarding enrollment for state and regional PHAs and for PHAs initially funded under either, I guess, the fiscal year 10 or fiscal year 2011 Voucher FSS NOFAs. If an As far as the state and regional PHAs go, if a state or regional PHA administers a Voucher FSS program in administratively distinct areas of its jurisdiction, the eligibility requirements of this NOFA may be applied to each separate area where the PHA administers a program of the required size. But again, this is something that you would have to ask for, and documentation would have to be submitted with the electronic application. And to qualify, state or regional PHAs, as I just said, would have to submit documentation. That can be an ad hoc report from PIC, or another listing. You can generate a listing from your PHA software, but in the case of a state or regional PHA, it would have to identify each separate administrative area and the participating Voucher FSS families in each of those areas. And again, to emphasize, the documentation must be included in your application submission. As far as the number of families served goes, the number, which I know quite a number of you have already looked at, because I've heard from a good many of you, it's posted on the Voucher webpage. The web address is on the screen, and as I said, these slides will be available later for you, so you'll be able to download them and read them at your leisure. But it's the Voucher webpage. If the posted number is incorrect, if it's too low, or if your agency is not included in the listing, you would have the opportunity to provide documentation of the correct number in your application. The citation section 1B10 describes that in more detail. Suggested documentation, again, as with in the case of the state agencies, would be an ad hoc report or another listing, such as one generated from your PHA software. Again, it would have to identify all families that were under the Voucher FSS contract at any time during the target period. Actually, before I move on, there was some confusion about that. All means every family to get the maximum count. Eligibility, initial full-time position rather, for PHAs currently administering Voucher FSS programs, except those initially funded in fiscal year 10 or fiscal year 11, to establish a new FSS program. The requirement is to have served a minimum of 25 families in their Voucher FSS program during the target period, or applied jointly with one or more other PHAs to meet the 25 family threshold. For those that were initially funded under the fiscal year 2010 or fiscal year 2011 Voucher FSS NOFA, that were funded to establish a new program, the minimum of 25 families will not apply, and that's mainly because you've had the funding such a short time that you really have not had time to implement a program and enroll. In some cases with the 2011 funding, you probably enroll any families. You're lucky if you've hired a coordinator. Anyway, for part-time positions, to qualify for up to 50% of a full-time salary, PHAs currently administering Voucher FSS programs that serve between 15 and 25 Voucher FSS families during the target period, and PHAs applying jointly with one or more other PHAs to meet the 15 to 24 Voucher FSS family participation requirement. And again, part-time position exception, enrollment requirements don't apply to those initially funded in fiscal year 10 or fiscal year 11 as new PHAs to implement a new Voucher FSS program. Funding for additional positions for PHAs currently administering Voucher FSS programs. The performance requirements for existing programs, eligibility for each additional position beyond the initial one will require that the PHA has served 50 more families than at the previous level. This is not new. We've done this for several years. But essentially, it means that in terms of eligibility for the initial position, PHA and currently administering would have to have served 25 families. For a second position, PHAs to qualify would have to serve at least 75 families, and for a third position, they'd have to serve at least 125 families. PHAs not currently administering Voucher FS, their eligibility. Briefly, PHAs not currently administering must have field office approval of an FSS action plan authorizing implementation of a Voucher FSS program. Eligibility based on approved program size requirements, since this is their commitment to establish a program. Similar numbers, the commitment for a full-time position would be at least 25 slots in the approved FSS action plan or moving to work agreement, or that number as joint applicants. And for a part-time position, these approved slots must be at least between 15 and 24, approved in the action plan or the moving to work agreement, or again, the number is for joint applicants. Funding priority categories. Now, I know this is always a concern, but the truth is that other than knowing this is something that HUD will be focusing on. It's not something that you should spend a whole lot of time worrying about because the categories are already established. But the first category we are going to fund, Category 1, is for renewal of positions funded under the fiscal year 2011 Voucher FSS NOFA. The renewals are subject to meeting the performance requirements of the NOFA, which has to do with the number of families served during the target period. Category 2 is PHAs that are currently administering Voucher FSS programs that weren't funded in 2011, that weren't funded under Category 1 of this NOFA, but that meet the requirements for the number of families served during the target period. Category 3 is for PHA applicants that do not currently administer a Voucher FSS program, but have HUD approval to implement a program, and that would be, of course, through their FSS action plan or moving to work agreement. And the fourth category is the renewal, Category 1 applicants that were funded last year that for any positions above the number that they received in Category 1. So it would be for new positions for those fiscal year 2011 renewals. The order of funding, what our way of starting is that we, starting with Category 1, we first determine whether there is enough money for all eligible positions that are requested in that funding category. And if there isn't enough funding for all eligible positions, then we begin funding applications as follows. What we would do would be first to look at the HUD policy priority status. Then for PHAs currently administering the program, the following tiebreakers would be used. And that would be, the first one is a PHA with the highest percent of positive escrow balances. Again, that would be calculated using the numbers in the additional columns that we asked for, or that we posted this year on the voucher website. And then PHA with the smallest voucher program size, and that would be as determined by HUD. For funding order Category 1, renewal within the priority category or non-priority group, HUD will fund what we are referring to as a round-robin fashion. We would start, for example, in that renewal category, if we didn't have enough money, we would start by funding an initial renewal position for all eligible applicants in that category, then fund a second position for all eligible applicants in that category, etc., until all funding had been expended and all renewal positions were funded. For Category 2, again, a round-robin process. The idea is that rather than starting at the top and this is a fairer approach, because if we should be running out of money, and in fact every applicant hopefully would get some, and most of you would get nearly all of the funding that you requested, rather than one or two PHAs getting all the funding in that category. In funding category 3, if we needed a tiebreaker, it would be the smallest Voucher FSS program, and we'd start funding those first. The theory being that there are fewer resources at a small PHA than a large PHA. And then the final category, 4 new positions for PHAs that were funded in 2011, above the number of renewal positions. Again, we would start in a round-robin fashion, doing a second position, a third, et until the funding ran out. Never know from year to year where the funding will run out, but I would certainly think that for all renewals there is plenty of money this year. Content of application, just want to go through a few things here. This has not changed significantly, but the SF-424, fax transmittal, lobbying disclosure, if applicable, the Voucher FSS application, that really is critical this year. You won't be disqualified if it's not included, but it is the basic part of the application, so please make sure that it's included. The logic model, there is one. Don't use a previous one. There is one that's part of the application package, so make sure you use that one. The other application recipient disclosure report, the certificate of consistency with the consolidated plan, and there is an alternative to that, which is a copy of this PHA's signed certification of compliance with the current annual PHA plan. And then also the Code of Conduct. As in previous years, there is a website where the Code of Conducts that we have are listed. It is on the screen. If it's too small to read, you can find it, I believe, in the general section, but also when the slides are posted. If you are listed, you're fine. If not, you have to submit the document. In terms of quite a few questions come up every year about locating the forms. You access them by clicking on Download Application Instructions and also Download Application Package at the Download Opportunity Instructions that is where you, on the grants.gov website, where you go for the Voucher FSS NOFA application. The items included in the application download application package are the SF-424, the HUD fax transmittal, the applicant recipient disclosure, the lobbying form, and the attachments form. In the download application instructions, if you click on that, what you would find is the acknowledgement of receipt, which my understanding is you only have to use if you were doing a paper submission. The HUD 2991 certification of consistency, if you're using that form. The HUD 52651, the application, the current logic model, and also accessible from that download application instructions section would be the general section itself and the current NOFA. Just a few notes about some of the forms very quickly. The PHAs last funded under the fiscal year 2011 Voucher FSS NOFA should select the continuation box on question 2, type of application on the SF-424. The federal identifier requested in 5A is the PHA number for each applicant, PHA, and then the federal award identifier is the PHA number plus FSS 8. If you apply jointly, I believe it would be of the main applicant, but if you can call me if that is a question that you have. Further on the SF-424, too close to FSS, 8D, be sure to enter your 9-digit zip code. On 10, 11, 12, and 13, those are pre-populated, and you don't add or change anything on those. Section 17, proposed ACC effective date. For most of you, most renewal positions, the date will be January 1, 2013 through December 31st, 2013. But that's actually not something you need to worry about too much. You can, as it happens, you could probably use that anyway. The actual date will be determined by the Section 8 Financial Management Center. They just need something on that SF 424. In Section 18, estimated funding, complete 18A, the amount requested from HUD in this application, and that should include the dollar amount for fringe benefits as well as the salary if the fringe benefits are applicable. And then the no funding amount should be reported in 18B through 18F, and the total will calculate in 18G. And again, there are instructions, further information in the NOFA in the general section. The HUD 52651, all applicants must complete Part 1. PHAs that are currently administering programs will also complete Part 2. And PHAs that are not currently administering programs, the new PHAs that are applying, would complete Parts 1 and 3. The Part 2A, the amount of salary requested to continue each position funded in 2011 may not be higher than the amount in the fiscal year 2011 award amount unless you are going from part-time to full-time. Any additional positions requested that were not funded in fiscal year 2011, however, would not be subject to that $69,000 maximum, but all salaries are subject to salary comparability, and again, that is information that needs to be included in your files. If you are requesting a part-time position, if you are a PHA currently administering, then you would enter 1/2, or I suppose it could be 0.50 in Part 2 of, and that would be C1. And if you were a PHA not currently administering, you'd enter 1/2 or 0.50 in Part 3, also C1. Okay, Part 2A, previously funded positions. The fiscal year last funded, that would be, for example, if you were funded under the fiscal year 2011 NOFA, that would mean that it was, what we're really tracking is the year of appropriation. So again, the most recent NOFA that was funded was fiscal year 2011, and that is because we trace it back to our fiscal year 2011 appropriations. If the position was last funded under the 2008 NOFA, then you should put fiscal year 2008. The logic model, it is again a required part of the application package this year. I want to point out that you can also use it for program monitoring and evaluation, so you do have to submit it to us. But hopefully you can complete it and have it useful to you beyond just the required submission with your application and then reporting at the end. There's a lot of, in the general section, more detailed information about completing it. And again, most of you have done this for many years now, so not a lot of change. However, as in previous years, my suggestion is that you print out the instructions from the instruction tab on the logic model and read it carefully. Again, do the one from the application package. It is the NOFA that needs to be submitted. It is the logic model that needs to be submitted under this NOFA. So do not submit using a form from a previous NOFA. And for complete the cover sheet and year 1 worksheet only, do not complete the total worksheet. And again, this is 1 year funding. Every year you do the 1 year worksheet, and then there'll be a you report at the end of the year. And again, remember that HUD policy priority status is being implemented through the logic model. And do not modify the logic model template do not cut and paste into the logic model template. That actually it will be a logic model that you will be asked to complete again. It will not be an acceptable logic model. Also, along the same lines, don't convert it to a PDF form, and don't save it as .xlsm format. The reason for this is that we eventually plan to aggregate the data, and in order to do that, we need to have the original Excel spreadsheet form and the proper year's logic model. When you open the logic model, click on Enable Macros, Security. Read the security instructions carefully. You may have to reset the security levels. This has also been true in previous years. General advice is really to note the detailed instructions in the general section for requirements for completing and naming the logic model. I know some of the logic models, one of the problems with a number of them in the last couple of years has been names that were too long. So the requirements I don't think have changed much this year, but make sure you're familiar with them, and if you're completing it for the first time, certainly read them carefully. Again, some general advice. The applicant's name in the logic model needs to match the applicant's name in box 8A of the SF 424, and there is a limit on the file name to 50 characters, but it is suggested that you not use more than 32 characters. Also, in naming your logic model, don't use any special characters. Don't include spaces in the file name. Apparently the grants.gov system views file names that don't comply with the naming convention as containing viruses. The HUD 2880, the applicant recipient disclosure form, Part 1, Question 2, the $200,000 threshold applies to funding requested under this fiscal year 12 Voucher FSS NOFA. If the amount requested is less than $200,000, answer no, and you don't have to complete Parts 2 and 3 if your answer is no. The your code of conduct, that should be actually in your admin plan, but also check the website that I mentioned earlier, and if we do not have a copy of that, you will need to submit a copy with your application package. And that will have to be done by fax, I guess, actually. And the fax number is 800 HUD 1010, toll free. Let's see. Or there is a 215-825-8798. But again, see the information in the general section on the submission details, and if your code of conduct is noted on the website, you do not have to submit again. Reporting after the award, really primarily PIC is the most important. FSS enrollment, progress, and exit activities are reported in Section 17 of the Form 5058. If for regular programs for moving to work PHAs, that would be the 5058 MTW, and that would be Section 23 of that form. There is a new notice, PIH 2011-65, on timely reporting that was issued on November 30th, 2011. Suggests that you pull that up on HUD clips and read it. The other place where you'll be reporting on actually for the funding that you receive under the NOFA for the coordinator, but also you report escrow deposits, escrow forfeitures, and the coordinator expenses, actually those that you fund from other sources and also from the NOFA funding. But all of those are on VMS, and that is quite important that that be done on an ongoing basis. The logic model and answers to the logic model program management and evaluation questions, those must be submitted to the public housing director in the applicant's Local HUD field office no later than 30 days after expiration of the fiscal year 2012 funding increment. And for most PHAs, that would be January 30th, 2014, because again, most renewal increments will be for calendar year 2013. Racial and ethnic data for the Voucher FSS program, that data is reported to HUD using the 5058. Some confusion on this every year, but for the Voucher FSS NOFA, the form 27061 is not used for this program. There are other reporting after awards. The sub-award reporting applies to awards made after October 1, 2010. Report sub-awards of more than $25,000 or greater within 30 days. There's a good deal of information in the general section and a little bit of information in the FSS NOFA itself on that. And then there is the Section 872 of the Duncan Hunter National Defense Authorization Act of 2009. See the general section. There apparently is information there concerning plans to create a government-wide system for information related to the awards integrity that will be used in making awards. But that is primarily, the general section will deal with that again primarily, although there is a little bit in the program NOFA itself. Finally, to sum up, none of this is new. Read the fiscal year 2012 program NOFA and general section very carefully, and be sure to base your application on the current NOFA and general section requirements, not on previous applications in your files. That also is something that happens nearly every year. Someone uses an old form, someone uses old directions. So the final read and carefully follow instructions for registration and electronic submission of the applications. Hopefully you're already fully registered and will submit electronically very shortly. For general information, some contact information, general information on the policy requirements in the general section. A number you can call would be 202-708-0667. There's a TTY number, 800-877-8339. And then for program-specific questions, you can call me, 202-402-4055, or my email address, which I assume has been on the screen, which is catherine.l.greenspan@hud.gov. And essentially, thank you for your attention. I'd be glad to answer any questions. And just remember that it's very similar to previous years. Most of you have done this before. Just take your time, read the instructions thoroughly, and all should go well.